Hi everyone, and welcome back. Sorry for the little break there. As many of you know, if you watched my last video, I took a bit of a break because I had surgery on my back. I had a lipoma removed. It's basically just a collection of tissue that kind of builds up and creates like a bubble almost on underneath your skin. Mine was rather large because I've had it for about 6 years and it was affecting like the way that I slept, doing yoga, everyday activities, and so I had to get it surgically removed. And because my doctor is kind of a pain, wouldn't give me a referral, so the recovery time has been interesting. It's a lot sore than I thought it would be, and it's definitely kind of more of a process. I'm not able to like swim or do yoga or do any like really strenuous physical activity for about a month, which is really frustrating to me. But for the most part, it's been good and people have been lovely. If you want to see what came out of my back, I did post it on Twitter, so I will link that down below because it's actually really gross. So I'm not going to insert it because I don't want to gross people out, but I will link to the Twitter picture if you want to see, because I was awake for the entire thing. But yeah, it definitely was an experience. October was also a weird month just because I was super stressed and kind of dealing with a lot of things with schoolwork and like mental health, and I didn't read anything until pretty much after the midway point of the month. Like I still ended up reading 5 books this month, but most of pretty much all of it was in about 10 days because I was home and recovering and I actually had time to kind of relax and read. I do a lot of reading for school. Like on average, I would say per class I read anywhere from 300 to 500 pages of like articles or books on topics that I'm not necessarily super interested in. So when I have downtime, I'm not reading as much, which is a bit of a disappointment, but that's kind of the reality of being in grad school right now. So sadly, school comes first, but let's get into the books that I read. So it was also Victober this month, and I totally failed at Victober. I only read 2 of the books on my TBR. I kind of hit a bit of a wall with Victorian literature in that I still really enjoy it, but I've been reading so much recently in like the past few months, a lot of Dickens, a lot of Hardy, and I'm kind of just burned out. I need a break from the Victorian, so I'm gonna finish my Hardy project, but I'm definitely taking a break from Dickens, and I'm kind of just trying to read more modern things. Surprisingly enough, I think 1 book from this selection like was published in the last decade. Shockingly enough, I actually read a modern book, and I'm in the process of reading another modern book, so it's quite a bit of a change for me, but I need that mix up right now because I'm just kind of, Victorian literature is getting a bit repetitive and like I'm not enjoying it as much as I was, so I think a change is due. So the first book that I read is The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens, which was on my TBR for Victober, and I listened to this as an audiobook, and this is the first book I finished. This was not my favorite Dickens. Like I enjoyed it, but its characterization of little people is really problematic. Like I get that it, you know, the time period and all of that, but it's just, he's very harsh on little people, and that's really unfortunate. And it's also just very repetitive for Dickens. Like it's the kind of perfect girl who can do no wrong and is very angelic, while the young dashing man runs around and has everything handed to him because he's just so good. And it's just kind of, it's very Dickens in its concept. So I was a little disappointed with this, and after I finished this I thought, all right, I need to take a few months off from reading Dickens. I think I only have like 4 of his novels left, but it's just getting repetitive. I love Dickens, but I need a break so I can enjoy the last 4 that I have to read. And then the next one, which was on my TBR that I read, and I actually read this on the train ride home because it does take me about 6 hours if I time it right. It took me 11 hours this time just because I had a big layover in Toronto, but that worked out in my favor. And I read Wessex Tales by Thomas Hardy, which is a collection of short stories. I'd actually read The Distracted Preacher before getting to this, so I didn't end up rereading that, but I did really enjoy this. There were elements in this that I really liked. The Withered Arm I thought was particularly strong, and I'm forgetting the title of the other one. I'll see if I can pull it up. And of course they don't have a list of all of the works, but there were a couple. The Street Strangers was really good. It was very gothic for Hardy, and there were parts of it that like were just you know, very Hardy-esque, but parts of it that were really gothic and experimental and kind of reminded me of Desperate Remedies. The Withered Arm is one of those. So I really recommend this if you like Hardy and you want to try some of his shorter fiction. I'm really glad I read this. So then the last 3 books that I read, I don't actually have the physical copies of. When I was in Toronto, because I had like 3 hours to kill, I ended up going to BMV, just the small one. If you know Toronto or you're visiting Toronto, BMV is a fantastic bookshop to stop into. It's used and overstock books. It's super, super cheap, and just really fantastic. And there's 3 locations in the city. There's the really, really big one, which I love visiting and spend way too much money at, in the Annex, which is like the Bloor and Bathurst area. If you don't know Toronto, that's kind of, it's called the Annex, and that's fantastic, but it was a little too far away from the train station. But there is a smaller one south of that in the kind of young Dundas area around the Eaton Centre, and that's the one I visited. There is another one up on Eglinton, which I don't like nearly as much. It's not nearly as clean or well stocked. The staff is not as nice, but I do love those 2 locations. So I did stop in, and I picked up 3 books and I read 2 of them, and I ended up kind of either passing them on or just leaving them at home for when I go home at Christmas. I'm gonna sell them. So I don't have physical copies, but the first one I finished is Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and I actually finished this on the train ride back to my hometown, which is a little bit north of Toronto. So I caught 2 trains that day and I read 2 books. I read Wessex Tales and then Grief is a Thing with Feathers, which is the book from this decade and century that I've read, which is shocking. But it was very, very good. It's actually from this year. I'm looking at my Goodreads to make sure I get everything in. And I rated this 4 stars. Now I would say it could maybe be a 3 3/4 star, but it was very good. It deals with grief, and it's kind of a weird mix of prose and poetry, which is something that, you know, experimental literature is not something I'm super comfortable with. If you want recommendations on that, definitely check out Jen Campbell's channel. I'll link that down below. And it was really, really interesting. I really like books about grief just because I'm trying to think of a way to say this. I'm always really awkward explaining this, but my father died when I was quite young, and so books about grief really resonate with me, and this is one of those ones. It kind of reminds me of, oh, and I'm forgetting the name of it, A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, in that it really captures what the grief process is like, and I think that's why I gave it such a high rating. And it was beautifully written and just absolutely wonderful, and it was at BMV, and I think it was like $7, and I kind of had it on my radar for a while to pick up, so that was definitely really, really great. Another one I picked up at BMV is Voyage in the Dark by Jean Rhys. I've read Wide Circles to Sea and I really enjoyed it, and this was the only other Jean Rhys that they had, and I have it in the modern, like the Penguin Modern Classics edition, and it was basically brand new, and it was like $8, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna read some more Jean Rhys over this break. I actually lent it to my mother, so I will be getting that back at some point, but I did enjoy this. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it. I'm kind of on the fence about that, but it deals with kind of post-colonialism and like the move of people from like the West Indies, not, is it the West Indies? My geography is terrible. The Caribbean into like England, and it's really interesting in the way that it deals with race and the way that it deals with kind of the notion of class, and it's just, it wasn't a very emotional read for me. I ended up rating it 3 stars. I didn't really connect to the character. I didn't actually care all that much about her, but it was really interesting in the way that kind of like it approached class, and it approached, you know, issues of women's rights and the way women are perceived when it comes to sexuality, and it was great in that regards, but the story itself was a little bit lacking, so it only got a 3-star rating for me. And then the last thing that I read this month is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth Von Arnhem. I got this as a gift from Ange at Beyond the Pages for my birthday, and I decided to take it home with me because I really wanted to read it, and I absolutely loved this. I gave it 4 stars just because it's the perfect kind of palate cleansing book. It's so lovely and so just heartwarming, and kind of just the perfect book for when you're feeling down. I ended up passing it on to my mother just because I think she would really enjoy it, but it's really great, and I might still pack my copy, but Yeah, it's about 4 women who kind of go to Italy on vacation and kind of are, for various reasons, disappointed with their lives, and kind of how they come to accept this and how they come to kind of become more complete women. Really great if you're a fan of like Under the Tuscan Sun, Eat, Pray, Love, that kind of, you know, self-aware, growing as a human being genre, which is not something that I explore a lot, but it's definitely, I would say it's much better than Eat, Pray, Love, but it's in that kind of theme. So really, really love that. So that is what I read in October, and I will see you guys in another video. Bye.